Pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, 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 while you've a Lucifer to light your flag. Smile, boys, that's the style. What's the use of worrying? It never was worthwhile. So
everybody said that this girl was his daughter. There was no way of denying it. She was not a fat girl. She was thin. Food was scarce at that time, but just as brave as her father. And now, by the side of the Scottish River, where the warships were growing like giants, with the stench of oil and steel in the air, she was distraught. Her heart was heavy inside of her chest, but she hid it behind a smile, just like her father. He could have stayed here. He could have worked on the warships that were needed for the war, but because his brother had joined up, because people had started to point at him, "You are fit and strong and healthy. Why don't you go and join the war?" And now he'd had enough. Almost 3 years of this. Towards the end of another year, where he could have worked in the shipyards, and in 1917, on a wet summer's morning, with his uniform upon his back, he strode and marched with his brother by his side, with a poster of Kitchener pointing at him. He couldn't stand it anymore. Everyone would look and say, "Why have you not joined up?" But as he went over to Flanders, he met many different people, Canadians, Americans, and he had started to taste things that brought a smile to his lips. Donuts. For the Americans seemed to have everything that they could possibly need, everything that they could possibly want. And they thought it was funny to listen to him, this small Scotsman who would not hesitate for a single heartbeat to go and fight with anyone at any place. He had seen that there was a gun post. He didn't hesitate. Again, he looked at them. He said, "This lot's mine." And before they had a chance to follow him, he had jumped over the top, and they could hear his voice singing, "Pack up your troubles, pack up your troubles, it'll be fine, I'll do this." And it seemed to drive him further towards the Germans. There was a bullet that ripped through his jaw and through one side of his cheek. A wound that seemed to put a permanent smile on his face. And when he returned after the war, people would say to him, "I know that you can't really smile, but we know that that smile is inside of your heart." And his daughter could not have felt more happy, for a brave father had returned from the war and had always smiled.
Pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, 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 while you've a Lucifer to light your flag. Smile, boys, that's the style. What's the use of worrying? It never was worthwhile. So pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, smile, smile. Keep the home fires burning while your hearts are yearning. Though your lads are far away,
She knew that her husband wanted to help, and she had told no one that she was Russian. She'd travelled to America to get away from the oppression of the Tsars. She'd practiced her American accent every day, but she had always hidden the fact that she could speak Russian fluently, for that was her mother tongue. She was a young woman, with sadness inside of her heart, but rich because she'd married into a fine American family. She was a small woman, but generous to a fault. Many people thought that she was too good for them, but when the war had been declared, she decided that she would help. As she looked out at the countryside with the smooth rocky mountains about her, she'd been talking with her friends about which of their relations, sons, brothers, uncles, fathers, had joined up. And her husband, without thinking, had joined with his own cousin, and now was going to go far across the sea. He was about to join. On this icy August dawn, she looked at him and felt so proud of the way that he looked in his uniform, some of the first Americans to go to that place. She adjusted her hair, and she could hear her children playing with a red ball outside. She'd placed a photograph inside of an old golden chain that was her grandmother's, inside of a locket, and as well as that she'd placed a small piece of the red silk pillow that they would sleep upon. As the icy sun started to claw its way between those clouds, she could hear the great clock in the hall start to chime. She looked at it. Gold handles, gold frame, gold hands upon it. Inside of this house, it had been her grandmother's before her. She waited many years. She watched that clock as it would tick her life away, sit by the side of a fire and hope that her husband would return, always a light in the window. But when it came to the point where people had no food, she didn't hesitate. She took that clock, she had it melted down, and all of the gold was used to give food to the soldiers who fought so far away. She thought that this golden clock would help some of the people fighting upon the Eastern Front. Some of the Russians would be able to feed because of the gold that she had given. And when her husband returned, she could see that one shoulder was slightly down. She knew he'd been wounded. The locket that he'd kept about his neck had got caught on barbed wire, and he'd gone back into the battlefield to get it, to keep it. And it was then that he had been shot. Oh, it did not deflect the bullet, but the bullet was driven close inside of the muscles of his arm, and his arm would lie by his side. As he sat down by the side of the fire, glad to be home, seeing that his children were bigger and stronger and older, he noticed that there was no chiming of the clock. What happened to the clock? He looked, he would have liked to have pointed. And when he found out that it had been melted down so that it would give food to those people who were starving in Europe, he smiled. He smiled to himself. When he walked out the very next day, everyone was talking about her. For when the gold clock had been melted down, they'd seen that it was filled with Cyrillic letters, the Russian alphabet. They did not know that she was Russian. They couldn't believe that this woman with a perfect American accent had been Russian all along. They saw her with respect. They saw her with pride and knew that her generosity had helped them and those people in Europe.
Keep the